I said, Barry, his blood coming down his face under his helmet, and he's definitely in shock. We're bobbing up and down, and I look at him and I said, Barry, what are you doing here? And as long as I live, I'll remember that expression and his response, which was just this dazed, glazed over look. And he just looked at me and he said, swimming. So I said, keep doing that.
Classic.
Welcome to the Calm and the Chaos podcast, where we discuss untold heroic experiences and dive into the mindset of the Navy's elite rescue swimmers. Hosted by former U.S. Navy Aviation Rescue Swimmer, Mount Everest solo summiteer, and best-selling author Brian Dickinson.
All right, Sean Tracy, 4 years active, 2 years reserve, had some incredible stories, experiences while you're in, and even just more so since you've been out. Just a fellow adventurer. You and I've been collaborating for some time now, and I'm just excited to have you on. Thank you so much for joining.
Oh man, my pleasure. It's good to share my adventures with my brethren and anybody willing to listen.
All right. So for those that don't know you, tell us a little bit about yourself. Like, where'd you grow up?
Okay, so as a young dude, Eastern Pennsylvania, sort of a country guy, grew up in farmland, sort of real
Wait, you're not
historic.
Amish, are you?
Quaker, which is another funny spin because we're supposed to be pacifists, but that's another story, so I won't get into that. Yeah, I grew up, just a simple country kid, a lot of playing in the woods and fishing and hiking. When I was super young, family moved to Southern California when I was ninth grade. You might see a dog running around behind me.
Yeah, that's the good
Uh,
stuff.
um, but moved to Southern California where I, instantly got hooked on surfing, spearfishing, all things beach, and ended up moving back to Pennsylvania for my senior year. Graduated from the same school district that I started when I was a young guy, and right out of the gate into the Navy. I had originally looked at going into the Army, and I wanted to be a ranger, but my mother, the pacifist, originally thought that being a ranger meant you counted deer and checked on trees. And when I took her to the recruiting office, she found out what they did. She drugged me out by the scruff of my neck. And it wasn't until a couple months later when a buddy of mine that had also recently graduated is like, hey, man, let's go down to the Navy recruiter. They apparently have some cool stuff. So we went down and talked about some different opportunities. And this AW thing was presented, obviously if we got whatever score we needed to get on the ASVAB. So fast forward, we both went in on the buddy system, and we went through the pipeline. I guess I reported to boot camp sometime in the fall of '83. And back then, the pipeline was boot camp. We went to San Diego, then to Air Crew School, Pensacola, and then from Air Crew School to A School in Millington. And then there, once we sort of got our orders, off we went to the different platforms. An
Nice.
interest.
Well, let's pause on before you just blush over Air Crew and Rescue Swimmer School.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
I want to hear about, like, because this was pre-Marecki. This was
Yeah. Yeah.
83. So yeah, tell us about your experience in SAR School.
Yeah. So after Air Crew, which was really fun, off we went to. Back then, we went to A School before we went to SAR School.
Okay. Where
So
was that? In Millington?
A School was in Millington, and it was then what we put in the orders that we wanted. We had been seeing class after class at that time put in for S3s. For some reason, everybody wanted to sit on a rocket chair.
Mm-hmm.
And the next, yep. And then the next in line was P3s. And then last, definitely at the bottom of the barrel, was Helos. And Buddy and I, not the guy that I went in with, because he was all about P3s and he was going to put in for them regardless. But another buddy and I had watched just class after class just come out, and they were all disappointed because they'd routinely get platforms that they didn't put in for. So we were like, you know what? Screw it. We're going to put in for something we know we're going to get, which nobody else wants. We're going to put in for Helos.
Mm-hmm.
we were actually called down to the command master chief's office, who is a tube slug P3 guy. And he said, "What are you guys doing?" And we said, "Well, we're putting in for helos." And he said, "We got decent grades. You got a good chance of getting P3s." And we said, "Well, we don't want to be disappointed." So he says, "Do you realize what you're signing up for? You got to go to SAR school. Those things crash left and right." And we
Wow.
had put in for West Coast too. At that time, West Coast HS was just, you were rolling the dice. So we said, "Yep, we're sticking with it, Master Chief." And lo and behold, when the day for orders came, we got West Coast HS. Big surprise. So from Millington, we packed up my buddy's 280Z with two surfboards on top and busted to the West Coast and rolled into SAR school. Just so happened we were the last West Coast SAR class,
Okay.
which was kind of iconic and epic all at once. Um, we were sort of told in not so many words that they were going to make us an example since it was the last West Coast class and they really wanted to, go out with a bang. Great bunch of instructors. The guy leading the program there was a SEAL named Senior Chief K-Bar, and just a beast. And he had his whole suite of instructors underneath him that were also pretty tough, badass guys. So I think our attrition rate, I think we lost about 50 some odd percent last class. Had some rollbacks, which was weird because they started there and then they had to park them someplace while Florida Pensacola Rescue Swimmer School was getting stood up.
Oh yeah.
So it was a great class, great experience. Tough. I mean, it was tough. They definitely worked us. We ran up and down the beach in Coronado, hung out down at the obstacle course, down at the amphib base. Um, Tough. Somehow we got through it.
Were you doing a
But
lot of like open ocean stuff
yep,
back then?
yeah, we would pop out in front of the strand in Coronado and just swim up and down the beach. They'd put a boat out there sometimes at night, and we would go out there. I think we did like one bay swim. Um,
It's
but yeah,
probably
we did it.
more dangerous to swim in the bay there. The
Yeah,
pollution coming in from Tijuana.
exactly. Exactly. So it was great fun, and I met some guys that I would end up being friends with all these years later.
That's awesome. So with 50%, probably 50% plus attrition rate, what was different about you that got you through such a difficult school, especially one where you were kind of like teetering on going fixed wing versus, it's just a different world back in 83.
Yeah, it definitely was, and there was just a different vibe. Once I started hanging out with the guys on North Island that had already gone through SAR school. They were in the RAG. Some of them were in squadrons, and talking to the instructors at SAR school, I started to sort of feel connected more with that community, with the SAR community, and so any sort of thoughts of going P3 or S3 kind of went away. It was made very clear to us that if we didn't make it, and there had been plenty before us, if we didn't make it, we were probably going to end up on an oiler or some tin can, undesignated, and
Mhm.
not loving life.
Yep.
Um, I'll add too, at that point, we also had another school, I believe it was post rescue swimmer school, which was called Common Core. And it
Mhm.
was acoustics for helo guys. Super high attrition rate because all of us were a bunch of knuckleheads anyhow. So there was a big drop rate there too. So I was kind of looking forward and saying, okay, I've got these two major obstacles, and I'm just going to compartmentalize, take one at a time. Fortunately, growing up in Southern California, surfing and spearfishing, I was fine in the water. I was fine with runs. It was more the peripheral academic stuff at SAR school. I was a bit of a goofball, and in weekends, instead of cleaning our barracks room, the notorious 864, which was a World War II vintage, just absolute shithole, we would hop in the car and head down to Ensenada and go spearfishing, surfing, drinking tequila, chasing girls.
Yep.
So more than once, SEAL Chief Cobber kicked in our door and shut down our weekends because the place was just a disaster. So fun times looking back on it, but I think for the most part it was just sort of it was a combination of pride and wanting to get through a really tough thing. I started to see how people in the community looked at swimmers and how they respected us. I respected what it was that we would be doing out there. And I really didn't want to go to an oiler or some boat,
Yeah.
shuffling pallets
Yeah, the
or
fear of
anything.
failure, and then who knows, because you didn't fail, but
Yep.
if you ever follow up with any people that did, it's like, did they really go undesignated? And if
Yeah,
it's
and
a
I do
tough
know some
school.
people that did, and they did not have as good an experience in the Navy as I did, and some did go undesignated and ended up one became an MP, another did mess crank for a while and then got bounced around to different
Mhm.
places. So fortunately, in those tough days, we stuck it out and got through it.
Yeah, so the threat was real. So yeah,
Oh yeah, definitely.
failure's not an option.
Nope.
So you went from there, you made it through Common Core. Did you go through SEER at that point?
Yep, I think it was trying to remember the flow. I think it was SAR school, then maybe SEER school, then Common Core I can't remember. But yep,
Mhm.
off to SEER school. That's always a blast.
Yeah, yeah, you learn a lot through that, but it's brutal.
Yeah, funny
Uh,
side story, which I'll tell you about once I get to my fleet squadron. That has to do with SEER school. I don't know if you want to roll into that now, or you want to keep going down the timeline.
No, no, no. Timelines are, yeah, let's jump around because this is the fun stuff. These are
Oh,
memories.
okay.
So go for it.
Yeah, so got through SAR school, got through Common Core, got through SEER, and then off to the RAG, which was HS10. I don't know if it still is, or HCS10, or whatever they
It
call
was
it.
when I went through.
So HS10, um, great time there. Did that RAG thing, and when we got done and I graduated HS10, they weren't quite sure where they were going to put half of our class. And one of the reasons is they were standing up a new squadron, which was HS-14.
Mm.
They didn't have any. They really didn't have any sort of structure as far as they didn't have a CO. They didn't have hardly anybody put together the OPSO or
Mhm.
any personnel. And they also didn't have any birds, so they were scrambling to get the hangar queens from
Mhm.
whatever squadrons they could. It was a real hodgepodge squadron. It was like the Bad News Bears.
Yeah. Was it
And in
in
the
Japan as well?
no, it was still in North Island.
Okay.
So we're in the big hangars there with all the legacy HS squadrons 2, 4,
Hmm.
6, 8, and 10. 12 was in Japan at the time, and then we
Okay.
were going to be the next ones, and all the odd numbers obviously on the East Coast. But
Yep.
uh, when we got there, I was like 2 weeks in, so I wasn't technically a plank owner, but our CO at the time was a command master chief, Larry Meadema. So they didn't even have an officer to be the CO. They had this master chief, old salty guy, great guy. And I think there was an A-dub that was like, AW1 was like the OPSO. It was just,
That's
it was
wild.
just let's make it work.
Yeah.
And I got there about 2 weeks afterwards, and they didn't have much going on. They had some birds, but they were still putting the squadron together. So they said, we're going to send a couple of you guys TAD someplace to just burn some time. And they ended up sending me to play with the Seabees. And I was like, okay, whatever. And I report to the Seabee building, and they said, "Yeah, we're going to be going out of town for a while. We're working on building these Chiefs barracks out in the middle of nowhere, and you're going to be going with us." I was like, "Okay." So I show up. They start telling us about what it is, and the Chiefs barracks they were talking about were at SEER School. So I'm going back to Warner Springs on a bus, hanging out in these barracks with these Seabees, building these Chiefs barracks. And at night, we would sneak down outside the fence, and I'd tell the Seabees that most of them had not been through, but I'd tell the Seabees, they're like, okay, now watch this guy. He's going to get the waterboard. This guy's going to, and we're like drinking beer, hanging out on the other side
Oh,
of the
wow.
fence.
That is the good side of the fence to be on.
Yeah, exactly. Even though I was told I'd never have to go back there after you go once, but
Yeah.
oh,
Well, how
oh
was that,
well.
man? That's crazy because that's like trauma, just
Totally.
like
The only
regular
reason I was able to
PTSD.
handle it is because we'd hit the E Club there at the Warner Springs and grab a six pack and just go hide in the sagebrush watching these guys.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah. So
So
yeah,
you,
HS-10, then to HS-14. The squadron stood up fairly quickly after I got back, and a great, amazing group of guys. Some salty guys that had already been out in the fleet, some of the senior enlisted guys, as well as some of the pilots. The problem was the birds. We had some just real hanger dogs, and it
H3s?
yep, they were all the hotels, and that started to make itself known once we started flying. We had an unusual number of mishaps, Bravos and some Alphas, and it was peacetime. It was
Yeah.
crazy,
Yeah.
crazy.
Well, you made it through. So you had some interesting experiences that you were going to share from, was it during a deployment?
Yeah, so I actually never got to do a Westpac. I was with HS-14 my entire first tour, and we did a couple. We did a NORPAC way up North Korea, Japan, across the Bering, came back that way. We did another one. I can't even remember what the hell that was called. Hawaii, but we never got to a Westpac. They actually did a Westpac like a month after I separated. I was kind of looking to do something else, so I got
So
out.
are
But
those like 3, 4 month deployments versus
yep,
6?
yep. And we were on the Ranger, which was quite an interesting boat. I have, very mixed emotions about that boat. It was my home, and when you leave the ship, you're always glad to get back to the ship. So there was all that, but man, that thing was either on fire or flooding or something.
Yeah, has a big history of that.
Yeah, we had a GQ fire drill once outside of ops, and we went out to man our fire stations. I was the guy on the nozzle, and we went through the motions. And the safety guy's like, "Okay, well, you got to charge the hose." We charged the hose. I charged the hose, and I started smelling GP5. It's dripping out of the nozzle. Some black shoe down below had switched some sort of lines or tanks or valves or something, and the entire
Wow.
deck's firefighting system on our level, which was right below the flight deck, was energized with JP5 instead of salt water. So there was
Nice.
that.
Throw
Yeah,
some fuel on the fire.
yeah. So yeah, we had a lot of rescues, man overboards. We had an S3 go in, crew picked them up. Um, we had 14, couple A6s. I mean, they were splashing them left and right. But the crazy rescue that I just happened to be on the flight schedule for was um, just a routine plane guard. And it was at night, about 500 miles north of Hawaii. Back then, I don't know if they still do it now, but if the plane guard destroyer was not following the ship, then they would put two starbirds in the air at the same time.
Hmm.
One would be inbound. One would be inbound in normal starboard D position, and the other would be further out, just sort of doing their thing. And then you would take turns flying around. One would come in closer, the other would go out. And we had been up for 3 or 4 hours, and we happened to be on that turn. We were the ones further out when we got a man overboard call. I was the swimmer. My first crewman, Steve Key, one of my best buds. Just saw him a while ago. I was running an ultra out in Arizona and stayed with him for a little bit. But he was the skipper's first crewman, and somehow they wanted me as the swimmer. I don't know, because I was a bit of a goofball. But regardless, that was our crew, and we got the man overboard call. Steve has me go in the back to rig for rescue. We're busting in because we're about, I don't know, 5 miles out from the ship, and pitch black. You could see the lights from the other helo, and you could see the carrier. But you just glance and you make sure everything's where it's supposed to be, and you keep heading that direction. As we got closer and closer, we're starting to look for anything that could be, a sign of the man overboard, trying to get more info from the ship. It's chaos on the radios. We're talking to the other helo. And we got in probably about 3/4 of a mile from the carrier, and we saw a flare come up out of the darkness. And so we instantly vectored over that way. And as we're doing that, I'm thinking, well, wait a minute. The only people that have flares are air crew. So it wasn't like just a deck guy. And as we get a little bit closer and closer, you're in the heat of the moment, and you're not really, you're just totally 100% zoomed in on the mission at hand. As we get closer and closer, spotlight picks up the reflection of a helmet, and I see it's a helo helmet. And I'm like, wow, this is really even odder now. So at
Mhm.
that point, it's dark. I'm going down the wire. I'm out the door. Steve hooks me up to the wire. I start going down the wire, and I looked down in the water, and I could see that not only was it a helo helmet, but it was somebody in a wetsuit, which would have meant it was another swimmer. I'm
Yep.
like, what in the hell is going on here? And it didn't hit me. I thought, okay, somebody was manning up for another alert bird, got up to the flight deck, fell overboard, and here they are. But it's
Mm.
at that point you just shift into training and what you got to do. So I get in the
Yeah.
water instantly. My face is burning, and wasn't really trying too hard to think about what was going on, but just get the thing done. Swam over, turned the guy around, and it's my buddy Barry Mills. He's one of the swimmers in our squadron. And I said, Barry, his blood coming down his face under his helmet, and he's definitely in shock. We're bobbing up and down, and I look at him and I said, Barry, what are you doing here? And as long as I live, I'll remember that expression and his response, which was just this dazed, glazed over look. And he just looked at me and he said, swimming. So I said, keep doing that.
Classic.
So I go through the procedure, make sure he's clear, signal the bird comes back in, hook comes down, I hook in, trying to keep Barry, cool and calm. And we start going up the hook, and, you start spinning as you're coming up under the rotor wash. And after one rotation, I'm about halfway up, 40, 50 feet. And out of the corner of my eye, I see the tail boom of an H3 just slip underneath the waves.
Oh, wow.
And I was like, what the? And I get to the after station door, and Steve is up there, and he's screaming at me, 613 went in the water, 613. And I can't hear shit because I'm underneath
Yeah.
the exhaust. So I get Barry off the line, and we get in the back. Actually, I fell back out. Steve will want me to remember that, but he thought I was goofing off. But there was too much slack once I got in the back, and I unhooked Barry. I was still hooked up, and I slipped and I fell out the door backwards, and I was dangling
Oh,
head
gosh.
first upside down. And Steve reeled me back in and read me the riot act for a second, thinking I was goofing off because I did a lot of that back then.
Yeah.
But I got up, got Barry strapped in the sonar seat, and then came back, and Steve had already had the hook on his way down again to pick up the next guy. So the next guy was, I believe, the OPSO, super experienced driver, Commander O'Keefe, who just passed away last year. I didn't have time to do anything because he was already at the door by the time I got back there, getting Barry squared away, taking care of him. He had a pretty big gash on his forehead and one on his wrist. But we got O'Keefe up, and the instant he got in the after station, he made a beeline for the cockpit, and he was screaming, it wasn't me, it wasn't my fault, I don't know what happened. And he was like, I need to fly back to the ship. He was clearly in shock.
Yeah.
So I was basically wrestling our OPSO to the ground, trying to keep him from climbing up to jump in the right
Yeah.
seat. So we got him back, and again, by that time, Steve had gotten the next guy up, Fred Rosinski, lieutenant, who I think just retired as an admiral. But got him up, and we ended up hoisting up the first crewman, Bill Meyer, who was also pretty shaken. Get back to the ship, hauled ass back to the ship, landed. They took us on the bomb elevator down to medical. I think I went down with Barry, and then one by one, they just brought everybody down and checked everybody out. turns my eyes were just burning from all the JP5.
Mm-hmm.
You know, even your mask on, you take your mask up, it's all over your face, inhaled it. But it was a pretty quick checkout by the doc. And once he determined that I was okay, he gave me a double shot of rum and sent me on my way. But
Really?
yeah, I was amped. Oh, I will add that I did rip off name tags. Do they still do that now?
Probably.
Yeah, so that was
Probably better.
tradition. Whenever you fish somebody out, and once you had them sitting on the troop seat and they were okay, you get them to give you a thumbs up, and you instantly rip their name tags off
Were they
for your,
flipping you off? Like,
for your collection. Well, they're usually so out of it.
yeah.
So yeah, then it was just trying to process it, and I don't think I slept for 2 or 3 days.
Hmm.
I don't know if it was just the excitement, the adrenaline, the fear. I'm not exactly sure, but it definitely left an indelible impression on me, even to this day.
Yeah.
Um, when you're 18 or 19 and stuff like that happens, it's kind of exciting, it's kind of fun, it's kind of cool.
Hmm.
But years later, it can come back, in ways you don't understand and revisit you.
Yeah.
So that was the crazy rescue, and the irony in the whole thing was that there was no man overboard to begin with. It was a bag of trash.
Oh,
So the Fantail watch had seen a bag of trash go off the starboard side. He saw something float by, called man
yeah.
overboard. And in the process of both birds, hustling to get this rescue, the other bird turned off their rat out and drove it into the water at 80 knots.
Oh gosh.
And yeah, the pilots both were ejected through the windshield, still strapped to their chairs, came to sinking in their chairs and pitch black. A miracle that they
Yeah, it is.
came to. Barry doesn't remember anything. He remembers the swimmer remembers unstrapping from the seat, and then next thing he remembers is my face. Um, Bill, most terrifying, the first crewman, unstrapped, and then he remembers sort of coming to in this darkness. He described it as like a cocoon of hydraulic lines, twisted aluminum, and wires, just sharp edges, trying to claw his way out of this thing. And then once he got out of it, he popped his LPU and up he went. But all for a bag of trash.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was quite a rescue. I got a Navy comm for it, and they put in for an air medal for some reason, but it didn't fly. And then I actually got this crazy award called the Kitty Hawk Aviation Sands of Time Youth Award, which was this big production up at the Beverly Hills Hilton. The mayor of Los Angeles was there. SecNav was there. At the time was John Lehman, and there was two junior pilots that had been the guys that had flown in and bombed Libya around the same time. So it's just like junior aviator kind of thing, but
Hmm.
super swanky affair. And funny side note, the guy that won it the year before me was a Marine. Um, I think he did like simulators, but he was just like a real shit hot Marine. And fast forward a couple of years, I don't know if you remember the story, but he had wanted to fly in the Marines, and he had some migraines at altitude, which was funny because he held in the civilian world all these crazy high altitude glider records, like 30,000 feet in a glider. And to prove that he was capable of flying military aircraft, he's an enlisted guy. He hops in an A4 at Miramar, fires the thing up, and goes for a joyride
Oh my
around,
God.
around San Diego for like an
Wow.
hour and a half when he lands. And of course, they get him and throw him in the brig. But he was the former recipient of the Sands of Time Aviation Award.
Wow. Okay.
So I was with good company.
Yeah, yeah. Went to his head.
I had an A6, EA6B that rolled final and never stopped rolling, and we watched them just each chair. We were just hanging out, getting our gear ready because we sort of saw it coming, and their chairs just boosh, boosh, boosh. And the fourth guy out, by the time he got out, the bird was completely 90 degrees, and the chair literally skipped across the water with the rocket firing. And
Oh,
my swimmer at the time was just like, we were getting ready to, be done. We were hawking the deck, and we're watching this. And I remember looking at him, and as the bird was rolling final, he's getting out of his wetsuit because we'd flown a 5-hour flight. And as he's bringing down his zipper and he's watching this thing, his zipper starts going back up.
yep.
It's like time to get to work. So, yeah, we had quite a few mishaps, both in our squadron and others. And I don't know if it was the ops tempo because it was, at the end of the Cold War, or the age of our birds. But man,
Oh,
quite a few. Had a bad mishap month after I got out. 4 of our HS-14 guys did the same exact thing that we did, just drove it into the water right off the coast of San Diego. None of them lived. We did DLQs one night. I hit the water, main mounts submerged, doing about 40 knots, coming in close to the destroyer. Pilots had no idea, and we're screaming. The after station's flooding with water. Somehow we didn't die. But there was a lot of that kind of stuff during that time.
yeah. Yeah. Like you said, man. So some people can do their whole tour and not
Yep.
have a lot of experiences. And then some, it's just crazy amounts. Sounds like, you were kind of in that, I don't know if it's a pivotal time. Like when I was in 93 to 99. We were in the transition of H3s to 60s. So then you have a lot of mishaps, and there was a 14 bird that went down, and they all died as well. One of them was one of my HS-10 instructors.
Is that,
And it,
is that Billy Quinn?
yeah,
Yeah, good guy. I hung out with Bill a lot. We were Copenhagen buddies. We'd go out and hit the town, and couldn't have been a nicer guy.
yeah, yeah. It's sad. And those things, they affect you, whether you're, in that aircraft or not. Like the rescue that you spoke about, I mean, they're so lucky to be alive. I mean, when you hit going that fast at night, if you're being ripped from your seat out the front windshield, once those rotors break off, the guys in the back, they're rigging for rescue. Your
Yeah,
mindset, you're like you're in this zone, and then next thing, if you get, like what happened, to the other guys, you hit your head and you're knocked out, you're gonna die. Thing flips over. Just super lucky, and I can imagine just the shock that they were in as you're going for a rescue. Next thing, you're being rescued, and it's like, how did I end up here?
yeah. I'll add, the op tempo, as I said, was really high, and there was also, because of the number of mishaps, there was a lot of pressure on the commands to sort of brush things under the carpet. I
Mhm.
remember after we hit the water, uh, the pilot freaked out once he realized what happened. Called the air boss, said, "I'm coming in." Air boss said, "No, you're not. We're recovering aircraft." And the pilot just basically beeline for the boat. We're pouring seawater out the after station, and he just
Mhm.
came in smack dab in the middle of the deck. And we got down into the ready room, and the skipper pulled us to the side. And I've got salt water pouring out of my helmet. We're completely drenched,
Wow.
and the skipper says, "You guys did not hit the water." And I'm looking at him going, you know, um,
Yep.
he didn't
And there.
last long in the squadron, but that started to sort of resonate with me. Like, what is that? How does that work? If they're not even worried about the safety so much as command and how it looks on their fit rep. I don't know.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, not a lot of accountability. Nowadays it's night and day from, when you and I served. Because I was
Good.
in a similar situation. But yeah, safety is just of the utmost. So, good and bad. So anytime you make a change, that pendulum will pin
Yeah.
one way versus the other, and it rarely does it ever level out. But I think from all the interviews and all the conversations I've had, it just sounds like it's night and day, and it's in such a better place.
Good.
Yeah.
Good. And I don't fault anybody because obviously the circumstances were very different, and everybody's just trying to do what they can. Um, I was just fortunate. I think part of the thing, and it might be a segue into you know going forward for me. But part of the thing that I carried with me after all that was just, I don't know if it's survivor's guilt so much, maybe just more an appreciation that somehow by the luck of whatever, um, I'm still here. And, the stroke of a pen often determined on the flight schedule, determined who got to live and who didn't. And
Yeah.
that happened in my reserve squadron as well. When I got out, I was flying with HSL 94 H2 squadron in Willow Grove, PA, and we lost a bird. Great guys. Just a weird, funky maintenance situation. But they all had, big lives in front of them, and they were all great guys. And there was absolutely no reason that that couldn't have been me, or you,
Mhm.
or anybody else. So that really struck a nerve with me, and to this day, I think I still carry with me just straight up appreciation and gratitude to whatever powers it be
Mm.
that kept me from that same fate.
I know that survivor's guilt's a real thing. And you know, my Everest experience, you
Yeah,
get down and you wonder, okay, why am I alive? And you question that. And like you said, it's you're so grateful for that, but at the same time, it's something that you carry the rest of your life. And yes, when you hot swap with someone next time, next thing they crash and die, that happens to, a lot of the folks. It's just every flight is traumatic on some level, just
yeah,
some are catastrophic. And
yeah.
then you have to live with that. You have to continue moving forward. And in our day, you didn't talk about it. So then
Nope,
that you throw it right in that box and then you and I get into high altitude mountaineering and adventures and we're channeling that chasing trauma in a different way, trying to make a positive outcome, but at the same time, at some
100%.
point, you kind of slow down and you go, okay, now it's time to open that box and deal with all this.
Yeah, mine opened on its own. When I got out, I pursued a career in aviation. I went to Southern Illinois University and got all my pilot's licenses. And um, I ended up flying as flight instructor, did some charter, and I wanted to do something a little bit. I never wanted to go to the airlines. I wanted to do fun flying. I guess that had been, kind of what I was into in the Navy. I wanted to be down there in the sticks. So I ended up going to University of Alaska and sort of making a degree, putting a degree program together that combined natural resource wildlife management with aviation because I want to fly like
Like a bush pilot.
bush flying with natural resource. There's a lot of agencies, state and federal, that used aviation. So
Hmm.
I did that, and I ended up flying in Ohio for Division of Wildlife, and they were sort of grooming me for the chief pilot position. They had fixed and rotary wing, a lot of low level stuff. We got some fun low level waivers to fly under bridges and power lines and do all kinds of fun stuff, which was right up my alley. But shortly after getting there and flying a lot, I think that was them trying to test me to see if chief pilot was up my alley. I started having just debilitating panic attacks
Yeah,
flying, which isn't a good thing to have.
not a good thing.
And I went to my boss, the then chief pilot, and he was a former Army Cobra pilot. And I said, John, there's some weird shit going on. At first, I thought somebody was like spiking my coffee.
Uh,
Honestly, the first time it happened, I'd been at a conference with the lieutenant governor of Ohio and then the chief of division of wildlife. I flew him up to a conference up by Lake Erie, waited around. They got done the conference. We get in the plane. We're flying back down to Columbus, and just this wave came over me. I'm like, I got to land this plane now. I,
mhm,
I had no idea what was going on. I just knew that I was like just freaking out. And I'm
mhm.
thinking, what's going on? And I was like, oh, that's it. Somebody put something in my coffee.
Must have been how we rationalize.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't think of anything else. So I somehow, and I'm like opening the window. It's like December, and I'm like tiny little vent window on the side. I'm like getting cold air. They're like, Tracy, everything all right out there? Like, yeah, everything's cool. Somehow managed to get them back to the airport,
Mm,
drop them off at an airport a few miles away from our home base was at Don Scott Field in Columbus, which is like a 5-minute flight. They got out of the plane. And I was like, I don't think I can fly this thing 5 minutes back to Columbus. Something's weird. Maybe I should just call a cab. They didn't have Uber then.
Mhm.
But I mustered it, courage, and I found that once I blasted off, if I stayed like 100 feet AGL, I was good. So I just like hauled ass back, landed, just shaking. Didn't know what was going on. Fast forward, said something to my boss, and I said, I think somebody spiked my thing, and he's like, okay. Kept flying. A couple days later, same thing happened. We were down on the Ohio River doing a paddlefish telemetry flight, low level with a biologist. 5-hour flight, and the same thing happened. And I was like, what the fuck's going on? So he suggested I go talk to somebody, talk to a therapist person, and she asked a whole bunch of questions. And the takeaway was she said, well, this sounds like a textbook case of post traumatic stress disorder. And I said, at that point, this was 93.
Mhm.
You didn't even hear about this thing. And I was
Right.
like, I don't understand what that is.
Yeah, you're like patient zero.
Yeah, well, I'd had an experience flying with Ohio too, which she thought was the trigger that I was coming back from a flight and approach vectored me into a level 5 thunderstorm. And I ended up upside down, flipped around, coming out of the bottom of the thing halfway inverted, like 600 feet off the ground, scooped it out, landed, thought it was fun. I was like, woo, just
Yeah.
like when you do these things when you're 18 or 19. But her
Mhm.
takeaway is, those are great. Those things, they're exciting and everything, but they do reside in that, as you call it, a box.
Mhm.
And sometimes those things either come out bit by bit or they come out all at once. Um, so anyhow, that sort of stopped me from flying for a while. I was just like, I got to figure something else out because this is just not sad.
Yeah.
So that was kind of what led me to my climbing experience.
Mhm.
I felt like I needed to recalibrate and do something really hard and figure out what was going on. So, um, in wanting to do that, I remembered being in Alaska at university and looking 120 miles away and seeing Denali and thinking, man, that's just awesome. I'd heard of a guy at school that had tried to climb it, and he didn't summit. He got this little ledge below the summit, um, and just wasn't able to do it. It's terrifying once you get up to that ledge. It's, as you
Mhm.
know, from Everest, very exposed, like 7,000 feet straight down this side, 4,000 that side. So he didn't make it. But I thought, that's what I need to do. I need to just sort of get in touch with myself. I'm going to do something really hard, and I want to climb Denali, but I want to do it somehow different than everybody else. So I said, well, I'm going to do it from sea level. I had seen a movie about an Australian guy. I don't know if you know the guy, Tim Snipe or Snope, but this Aussie did Everest, but he started at the Bay of Bengal.
Mhm.
And he came from sea level, pedaled across India, then up into Nepal. No Sherpas, summited, I think no oxygen. So he became the first person to do Everest from sea level all the way up 29,028
Yeah, that's
feet.
cool.
So I was like, that's what I'm going to do. So I called Park Service. The Park Service in Alaska is like, sorry, Anchorage is like, 160 miles down the road. Somebody's already done it. I was like, oh, man. So a couple days later, I'm thinking about it, kind of bummed out. And then it hit me, well, maybe there's someplace lower than sea level. And I remembered when I was a kid, when we'd moved to California, we had driven through Death Valley. I was like, that place is lower than sea level. So I looked it up real quick. Sure enough, it's lower than sea level. I called the ranger back, same ranger, and I said, how about, has anybody ever gone from the lowest and summited Denali? And he's like, no, that's just plain crazy. Nobody's. I was like, that's me.
Got
So I
to
started,
get crazy.
yeah, I plotted and schemed and found a friend to drive a support vehicle, my old beat up Land Cruiser that I met while flying in Ohio. And a year later, set off and pulled it off. Crazy adventure, but just like the Navy, I think was really instrumental in sort of showing me what I was capable of, and meeting some amazing people, and just a newfound appreciation for being here.
Yeah.
So that was my Denali thing.
Yeah, that's awesome. No, I've climbed it 3 times, but I've just like your friend, I was right there in like the football field right at the end, just weather didn't work. We were pinned down at high camp for a week.
Oh,
Another time I snowboarded it.
oh, did
Um,
you really?
yeah, but still haven't
Nice.
stood on top like of the 7 summits. That's the only one. So, but I always feel like that's part of my story is being okay with coming up short instead of
Yep.
just going after it over and over and over. I've climbed the rest of the 7 summits and soloed Everest and Aconcagua and obviously my survival story. But yeah, it's a beast and just to do it normal
Yeah.
is tough to do it from what you did is that's next level. That's awesome.
Well, it's a funny side note. A guy just pulled it off. I had been the only one that had done it. And I think that one of the hardest parts of it, obviously, weather, it
Hmm.
all boils down to weather. If weather lets you summit, then you're going to summit.
Yep.
But the walk in from Talkeetna, we were in places where I don't think there was any human contact ever. I mean, just
Hmm.
bottom part of the kilt, the glacier, tons of crevasse falls, spectacular scenery. 13, what do we do? 13 or 14 days on the approach alone, and then 13 days on the mountain. But to me, I think the summit was great, but once I got up there, I was ready to be done. Actually, at the top, that little football field right before the summit ridge, I looked down because up to that point, the exposure is not too bad. Obviously, you get to the top of the head wall after 14, and at
Hmm.
16, it's a little weird. But when up at that summit ridge, I remember coming out, we had perfectly clear blue sky, 20
Nice.
below. And I looked out at that ridge and I was like, I don't think I can do this, man. This is scary as shit. And
Yeah.
my buddy that was with me is like, let me get this straight. You came all the way from Death Valley, 3,600 and whatever miles, and this is it for you? And I was like, good point. So I just mustered up the courage and one foot in front of the other. And,
Hmm.
4 hours later, even though it's only 100 yards, you're just standing on the summit. And then I was like, okay, great, great, let's get down.
Yeah.
But this other guy just pulled it off. And he just last week got done doing his name's Ollie France. Ollie just did South America, lowest to highest, and he's gotten
Hmm.
Africa. So he's off for Asia next year. So I had wanted to do that after I did the low to high in North America. I was like, that's what I'm going to do. But you know, life
Yeah.
happens,
Life
and
happens. Yeah.
yeah, and it's fine. I mean, I don't. I'm just happy that somebody's going for it. So
Yeah. It's fun to watch, be a
yeah,
observer. So
yeah.
so climbing can be, very tragic. I've had more rescues in the mountains, way more than, but I was only in for 6 years. But um how was there additional trauma that you compiled throughout your climbing or adventure careers, or has it not compared to what you went through in the military?
Yeah, I mean, when we were on Denali, there was, I think, 6 fatalities. 2 of them on Mount Hunter. We sort of watched it from base camp. Giant serac the size of a Walmart took out a really famous climber with the other guy's name was Steve House. Might have heard his
Yep.
name. Yeah, so he was with a guy and he got a nice screw in as he's watching this thing come down.
Yeah.
Couple guys from exposure up top, and then a couple falls on Denali Pass.
Mhm. What year was this?
97.
Okay.
Yeah, I think they they definitely had an impact on me, um, more afterwards than during, because one of the things I
Mhm.
think I learned in the Navy was when you're setting off on a particular task and you somehow laser beam focus in on it, nothing really can get in the way of that. And that
Mhm.
that is one thing I was grateful for from my training, is just being able to zero in and just get something done.
Yeah.
But in retrospect, now looking back, it's like, wow, I was there and a bunch of guys died, and I was in the military and a bunch of guys died. And again, I think more so in the Navy, it's just a random thing. And the climbing, certain things will probably lead up to those deaths, whether or not it's pushing weather or pushing, exposure or not being prepared enough. Um, I mean, I don't know how much of that I can claim because I had zero experience climbing.
Hmm.
Zero. I was with a bunch of really experienced, two really experienced guys, and then just an animal from Fairbanks who is a very good friend to this day, and we do. He helps me out with my ultras up in Denali every year. But yeah, there's definitely bits of that trauma that stick with you. You know, people that you meet that aren't around, and that's part of being in the mountains, I guess.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
And
Well,
you've probably experienced a hell of a lot more than that than I have, with all your time on big mountains.
yeah, yeah, and yeah, you don't realize until later that you're actually kind of chasing that trauma, and a lot of us had maybe traumatic, you know, childhoods, and then you get into these places where you're trying to control the trauma, and abuse or whatever. As a rescue swimmer, that's like the skill that we have. You're jumping out of well, not in your case, but the helicopter's gotten better, a perffically good helicopter.
Yeah, I don't know
And
if ours were ever perfectly good. I
but
love the H3, but I don't know if they were ever perfectly good.
nope. But yeah, I mean, I always say that's our job was the ultimate form of serving others. It seems like you've done a lot of that in your civilian life. Is there anything you want to like, as far as like your mindset and your willingness to just serve others?
Well, I think you brought a good point up, and it's probably part of why I'm doing one of the things that I'm doing now in these ultra marathons, and that trauma, trying to sort of wrestle that and cope with that. I've heard a lot of people in the ultra marathon world refer to what we do as trauma bonding, and
Hmm.
uh, you know, I don't think there's any better way to describe what we do out there
Yeah,
because
nailed it.
it's we're putting ourselves voluntarily in these extremely painful situations where you experience the entire spectrum of human emotion over the course of I don't think it happens much on the 50-mile or below races, but on the hundreds that I've run and the 135 that I ran, you are truly seeing the lowest of lows, the highest of highs, and everything in the middle. And it's all by choice. And
Yeah,
it's with other people that are doing it by choice as well, and paying for it, literally paying money
yeah,
to experience these things.
yeah.
So, um,
Can't blame anyone but you.
yeah. So I think, I experienced that in putting these races on. Actually, um, I started running those just as a health thing. And I had my daughter when I was older, and I was worried about her worrying about me because, she thinks daddy's old. And I just wanted to show her that I wasn't going anywhere and that I was healthy. So I started running, and then I realized in running marathons, I wasn't getting much faster, but I was getting more stubborn as I got older. So a friend had been doing Badwater out in Death Valley,
Hmm.
which is an insane race. I went out and I paced him out there, and I was like, "These are my people, man. These are my people." So I got into that. My daughter's idea when we were vacationing in Alaska one year, she said, "You should put on an ultra up here on the Denali Highway." I was like, whoa, hold my beer. Called a buddy. My buddy came up and we did the test run, pulled it off. The idea was to be able to run it in the time frame that we were going to make the cutoff for other people's. And I had met this guy running when I ran the Vermont 100. And so we went up and we pulled it off. Didn't get eaten by bears, trampled by moose. So the next thing you know, I'm starting a little company doing ultra marathons. And I think the biggest takeaway for me there is being able to provide a venue and an opportunity for people to experience that range of emotions and to also push themselves harder than they thought they were able to go. And that again was a takeaway from my Navy training, from my climb, and knowing firsthand what that feels like and what that does to yourself, as far as believing in yourself
Hmm.
and being able to cope with tough stuff. I mean, yeah, it's the company is called Spirit Trips, and it's our logo, I thought about it for a long time, and it's epic, good, hard fun. And, sometimes, you know, putting yourself in an uncomfortable situation voluntarily, I think, is super beneficial in your everyday life. It brings things into perspective. Is it really that bad if you get up one day and you're out of coffee, or, whatever, you got to
Mhm.
deal with some a-hole on the phone, when you realize that there are much, much, much harder things, especially for people. Listen, you don't have to run ultra marathons and do all this hard stuff, but it also gives you a deeper appreciation for people that are living their own super hard ultra events, be it mental illness or fighting cancer or just hardship of any sort. So I think a little self-imposed suffering is good personally, and I also like giving people the opportunity to sort of explore that themselves. And it's been great. We've done this now 4 or 5 years. I think this will be our fifth running, and it's growing by leaps and bounds. It still floors me that people are willing to pay hundreds and hundreds of dollars to come up and beat the shit out of themselves and run 135 miles through bear country, but they keep coming back.
That just tells you, man, the life we live, they've had these perceived limits that maybe were superficially put on them, or they put them on themselves, and these voices that they've heard their whole life. But the just humans, what I've noticed as well, and it's amazing what you're doing with Spirit Trips, they are seeking adventure. They're seeking to push beyond their perceived limits, and you've created a platform to do that, and that's amazing.
Thanks, man. It's been fun. It's mutually rewarding. I do really, really enjoy giving people that opportunity. And, we try and find really cool places. We're looking at a beach race, like a 50-mile remote wild beach run,
Mhm.
just running with wild horses and no sign of civilization. I've run the course a couple years ago. It was a 50-mile run. I did it with a friend, and we're looking to set that up and add that to our offering. But yeah, it's always just about, pushing a little deeper inside and seeing what else is out there. And I also did it. My day job is I have a distillery. I don't know if you know that, but
I didn't.
yeah, that's my day job. So a little craft distillery, and we do a little bit of everything. We have, whiskey, and everything's like a little shout out to a little chapter in my life. Our vodka's called Denali. My rum is called Shipmate. So we have some fun stuff in there, but it's also a nice balance. Everybody's like, "Oh man, it's got to be tough to not be sampling everything." And truth be told, I really don't drink hard stuff.
Yep.
I'm getting too old for that. I've had my time, but
Yep.
um,
What's the name of it?
Hewn Spirits, HEWN, and that's a shout out to my former business. I used to convert old barns into sort of one of a kind custom houses. That was after I did
Well,
my
that's what Quakers
Denali.
do.
What's that? Yeah, yeah, yeah. Those are Amish. Those are Amish. The Amish aren't making whiskey, I don't think.
No,
And if
definitely
they
not.
are, they're not telling you about it. Um, so yeah, I've done a bunch of different things, and I think that a big part of that is also just, again, realizing that I'm fortunate enough to be here, and I think about all these guys, and there's dozens of them that didn't get that opportunity. Dozens in my realm and yours.
Mhm.
We
Yes.
all served for a period, and they didn't get the chance we did. So it's kind of like the least I think I can do is just try and wring it out as best I can.
Yeah. No, and you're doing that. And you're right. Every day is a gift. We've been given that for whatever reason, and you want to make the best of it. You want to pivot to a hypothetical rescue? Put you back in your wetsuit?
Ooh, okay, which I can still fit in. I might point out.
Hey, nice. Yeah, same. Um, okay, let's do a large, this is just hypothetical, and it's
Yeah, yeah.
just the mindset. So we're going to go
Okay.
back 40
All
years
right.
here. Large scale maritime disaster.
Ooh,
Okay. The
okay.
scenario. The scenario. A cruise ship experiences catastrophic engine failure and begins sinking during a storm. Hundreds of passengers are stranded in lifeboats or in the water, some with severe injuries. You are flying out, dressing out. That's all the information you got. What's going through your head?
Okay, if that's all the info I have, the first order of business would be trying to, as we were taught, assess the situation, and I'm gonna try and get the pilots to get any more information that we can. Has there been any sort of divvying up in those lifeboats of more injured versus not, women, children, that sort of thing? Um, and obviously, what's the sea state? What are we flying into? Who's my first crewman? Who are my crew? I always used to think that when I was flying. Fortunately, I had the best. My first crewman, Steve Key, saved my ass more times than I can count. But I would be factoring in who I was working with and their capabilities, assuming that it was my crew that I had. I'd be not worried about that in the least, and I'd be talking through that with them, thinking of the capabilities of the bird. How many people can we get? What do we have in the way of flotation, life rafts? What about the boat? Can we get another bird sent out? And just trying to sort of set up the best case scenario as far as many assets on site as we could get. If it's, once that's sort of been done, do all the prep work en route. We get there, and if we didn't get any feedback from the ship, we would basically just be looking to start bringing people up. If there was life rafts that were sort of in close proximity, if we could determine, is it day or night? I guess, if we could see from the bird clearly that there was injured people in one versus the other. It doesn't sound like it was a catastrophic, traumatic experience, more or less just people getting in life rafts. We would start bringing them up, and if the ship was foundering, obviously we couldn't take it back to the ship, and we'd be looking to put them back on whatever platform we came off of, be it the carrier in our case, although I did a couple deaths on the small boys, and just try and ferry as many as we could, given fuel state and conditions and so on and so forth. But I think not having any info, your hands are kind of tied to just basically getting out there and just beginning as best you can. Um, I think there's the possibility of talking it over with the crew. You could go down the wire, and again, if the rafts are close proximity, you could have the pilot, sort of air taxi around and you look for women, children, elderly, and try and get them out first. Um, Obviously, if there was anybody in the water, they would be first priority. If they weren't in life rafts, they would come up first. But these are all things we talk about en route.
Cool. Yeah, you crushed it, man. It's funny how like you've been out for a few years now, and your mindset can go right back. Like it's ingrained. It's
Yeah,
just like
I've
you think.
I've had some problems with relationships in the past because that is so ingrained that, and I think a lot of service members have it, especially ones that have been trained to sort of exist on a hair trigger, so to speak. Going in restaurants, needing to sit with my back to the wall, being able to suss everything out, going
Hmm.
into a store and knowing exactly where I need to go and getting out, and just being extremely methodical and efficient, in terms of just getting things done. And it's a hyper situational awareness that, I honed that too in flying, be it a flight instructor and wildlife person, but also a lot of it comes back. Most of it comes back to the Navy, which floors me too, because if you think about the percentage of time you're in the
I
service,
know. It's
and
wild.
I'm knocking on 60 this year, and I was only in for a total of 6 years.
Hmm.
What impact that 6 years has on your ability to sort of assess the situation, figure out every contingency you can in a very short order period of time, and move through that situation.
Hmm.
It's wild. So hats off to the Navy, I guess.
Well, okay, so it's a good I don't know. topic to talk about because we were 18 and our brains aren't fully developed till 25. So you're put in these situations and you're forming like the core of what the rest of your life. When you think of like Vietnam vets and different folks that they may have been there for a year or 2 years, it's impacted their whole life forever. So it is similar, but it's interesting what we do with that information and how, like you said, you're walking through life and you've identified, how it affected relationships, and then, you self-assess and you either do better or you continue down that path. All we can do is always try to be better versions of us and not be overly ashamed of the past. But we all have that because we're just young, dumb, and we're learning and we're unlearning as well, unlearning what we may have learned as, kids and what we had no control over. So yeah, life is interesting. Yeah, I'm 50, so I'm kind of on that other side of it as well, reflecting back and, just seeing what the rest of my life is going to look like. And I don't know, I think those of us that have done what we've done, we have a lot of wisdom that we can share. A lot of, we've had experiences that people won't ever truly understand. No one can imagine like the stuff that you've been through, both in and out. But based on that, what type of wisdom? What's some wisdom that you would leave our listeners with?
Hmm. Well, I think you hit on a good point, Brian, and that is, the military does what it does well because it has so many young people, and because we're not fully emotionally and psychologically and developed, and we're still physically, we're not fully developed in
Hmm.
our brain. And I'm living that firsthand with my 14-year-old daughter, trying to reason with her. That's just a waste of time. But I hear, from other shipmates that went on, a bunch of guys in our squadron went on, got their wings, flew, got out as commanders. They spent 30 plus years in, and they always speak most fondly of their time when they first went in, when they were
Hmm.
young, when they're
Yeah,
18 or
same.
19. Best command was our first command. And I think
Yep.
there's a reason for that. I think it's because we weren't fully developed, and
Hmm.
because all those traumas didn't impact us the same way they would today. Like when you're 18 or 19, and I remember seeing a guy's brains and a fellow swimmer's parachute bag he brought back into ops, and I was like, we're making jokes about it. Like that's his girlfriend's phone number. I mean, when you're 18 or 19, because you aren't fully developed mentally, you're able to sort of brush these things off. And I think the takeaway is um, understanding that we're constantly evolving, and even at this age, I'm trying to better myself, and I'm trying to learn from where I've been, so I have a better experience in where I'm going. Um, the other the other hope is, and I don't know, do you know what's his name? Taylor Geiger. Do you know Taylor? Um,
Hmm.
he's a swimmer. Got out, had some trauma issues, and made a movie called Hell or High Water, I think.
Okay.
Sailed around Cape Horn. He was like, a couple suicide attempts, but he's a swimmer.
Yeah,
Did a
yeah.
movie.
Yeah, I saw that. That just came out like pretty recent, right?
Yeah, super good guy, but trying to be better.
Hmm.
And his big point was, and I think again, this is my hope, that when I got out, it was like, here's your papers, hasta luego, and
Hmm.
there was no sort of unwinding of the spring that we all were. And I think there's more jobs in the military in general that have that same component, be it combat things or high stress things like SAR, the teams, obviously EOD. But when I got out, it was literally, here's, go to dispersing, get your travel pay, and see ya.
Yep.
And I popped back into the civilian world, and I was like, you carry all this stuff with you, and you sort of try and assimilate back into society. But I really, really, really hope, especially given the fact that we've been at war for 20 years plus, that they are doing better in trying to unwind that spring for service members and to get them out there, so they could be a little bit better functioning members of society. However that is, and I mean, I didn't have it, and I think for me, doing the things that I did was my way of unwinding. Doing my climb, doing my
Yeah.
ultras, and it will continue to be. But the final thing I'll say is I'm super fortunate to have been able to do what I did, and to do it with the people that I did it with, a lot of which I'm super close with to this day. And all of us would drop anything to be at the doorstep of any one of us that needed it. And that's a rare thing. So I'm fortunate and grateful for that. And hey, man, super big hats off to you for sharing, your story and your experience, and bringing everybody together to sort of get a glimpse of that crazy stuff we did when we were kids.
I know. It's fun things
And
you did
hats
when you were
off to
kids.
Bryce Williams, another swimmer who's out actually doing the Iditarod Trail Invitational as we speak.
Oh, cool.
He's doing the 350 mile. He's probably about at mile 150 as we speak. Dragging
Wow.
a sled, sleeping on the side of the trail,
Yep, that's the life.
doing good stuff, man. And that's it. A hope is that when people get out, you've probably seen it on some of the social media sites where there's AWs still sort of living the glory days. It doesn't stop. You can keep doing stuff, even if it sounds like it's harebrained and it sounds too hard or too tricky. Take the first step. Take the first step. You won't regret it.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, there's no reason to camp in the past. There's always present and future. And yeah, the future just looks different. And as soon as you embrace that and you're realistic of what you can do and still pushing, not just settling, there's a lot of fun out there. There's so much adventure in this world, and that's what keeps me
Absolutely.
going.
Absolutely.
Well, Sean, thank you so much for spending the time with us.
Oh, man, my pleasure.
Was amazing. Yeah. So just keep doing what you're doing. I'll put the Spirit Trips website up on the socials and
cool.
everything.
Thanks,
And
man.
yeah, just keep crushing it out there. And for everyone else, thanks for joining, and we will see you next time.
Thank you for listening to the Calm in the Chaos podcast. Please subscribe to be notified of future episodes, and if you enjoyed what you just heard, please leave a 5-star review on whatever platform you listen to podcasts. Until next time, get out there and make a difference so others may live.